Hello there, reason people, Pooh Bear here, and welcome to my channel. And today, this is just a discussion. It's a fact-finding mission, more for me, to do with CV data. Um, I hadn't actually ever proven how CV data, how often CV data is actually collected. I'd always accepted it was like collected every 64 samples. We'd collect a bit of CV data, and I must admit, I was out walking with my dogs, as you do, and every now and then my brain goes off on a tangent, as you can probably imagine. And with my particular audio card, I can have, obviously I've got 96,000. The smallest buffer size I can have is 64 samples, if I was to go to 96,000. If I was to go down to 48,000, the largest buffer size, or the smallest buffer size I can have is 32 samples, so it's like half the amount. But it's the same ratio. And what I mean by that quite simply is if I was to come here and say 90, oh, we're not working, I'm clicking on the wrong screen. 96,000, there we go, divided by 64. So we're going to do 1,500 collections, and obviously if I was to say 48,000 and divide that by a sample rate of 32, we do 1,500 collections. So that's what I'm talking about, the same ratio. So they're doing the same amount of collection, just one's collecting twice the amount of data over the other. But my brain then, for some reason, went off on a little tangent saying, fine, I'm collecting my CV data whenever I do my buffer size is saying when I'm going to be collecting my data. And then I suddenly thought, well, hang on a second, if I've got a buffer size of 32, does that mean I'm going to be collecting a piece of CV data every 32? Which then clashed with another part of my brain saying, well, no, because we collect every 64 samples, we then collect one bit of CV data. See what I mean? It gets very, very confusing, doesn't it? Even me trying to explain it. So I'm not surprised that my brain took one bit of kind of technology, i.e. CV latency, which I've done videos about, then was taking this kind of technology and trying to marry them up, and it's left a seed of doubt in my head. And I thought, I've got to go and prove this one way or the other. Let's just go and try and get this proved. So what I've done is I've got my good old CV8X4. I put a little bit of automation on it. I'm running on a buffer size, I've got that in my head. I'm running a tempo of 240, which will actually give me a complete second. So it makes my timing to work everything out nice and simple. I'm running at a sample rate of 4,800 as well. So that means I'm going to have 48,000 samples between here and here, but this is CV data, so we're in a different kettle of fish altogether. And as I say, this is something I've never measured before, and I thought, can I measure this? Let's see if we can. So I've taken that data and I'm putting it through the CV to audio. And when you do CV to audio, that's not a problem because CV is running at a very low rate and audio is running at an extremely high rate. So we can go that way, no problem at all. And I'm pumping that into Voltage Modular. And then inside Voltage Modular, I happen to have a couple of my meters. My big counter happens to count every single sample. So in this case, because we're in Voltage Modular, it's also running at 48,000. So this is capable of counting 48,000 changes per second. And that's obviously the maximum speed we're actually running at. And it only counts the actual change. So the CV signal changes, it will do the count. I've also got a big meter, which is a rolling meter, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And I've also got a latency checker as well. So first things first, if I was just to hit play, he says, let me just click on, I'm going to keep that open. I'm just going to push that to one side, click on play. Cool, we're running. So you can see we're running that little bit of CV data and we're whizzing off. More importantly, that's obviously going through the system. It's coming through here. We're counting up, and look at this per second, 750. If you remember on the calculator, it was saying 1,500. So it doesn't matter what sample rate I choose. So I could choose at 32 samples, or I could even choose, 1,024 samples. I'm still always going to be picking up my bit of CV data, only 750 every. Well, this is per second, so yeah. So every second, that's all I'm going to be picking up. So basically, every 64 bits of samples, I am picking up that bit of CV data. The nice thing is we've got this rolling meter, so if I was to turn this on, he says, yep, here we go, it's rolling. So let me just do a stop of that. And that's giving me the same sort of data. So it's saying, hey, I've got this voltage and I've held it for 64 samples. Then I've got a new bit of data for 64 samples. So this is us going off and proving that yes, every 64 samples, we're grabbing a new bit of CV data, no matter what the sample rate is. Brilliant. There we go. I proved it. I've got rid of that seed of doubt in my head of what's going on. Now, this is where things got a little bit awkward. Is when I started looking at the audio side. The funny thing is, I had never, ever, ever done, let's come into here. I've never, ever done a sort of loop back on my audio. I've always done loop backs on CV, and we've looked at latency on CV, and I thought, oh, hang on a second, we've probably got obviously latency on the audio as well, but I've never ever tested it. It's one of them just silly little things I've never tested, so I thought, hey, I can test this as well. So obviously little LFO, you can push out an audio signal, I can loop it through these, and I can push this back into voltage modular, and I've got myself my latency monitor, and we can sort of monitor that and watch the results coming into it. So it's actually turned on at the moment. So if I was to come over to here, I've got to turn it off actually. Let me turn it off. I can put this into a start mode, which is waiting. And then when I click this on here, it's told me my latency is 384 samples, which would be absolutely correct because I'm actually running a buffer size of 128 at the moment. So when we come down to here, oh, I didn't tab around to the back. What's going on here? Try hitting the right screen. So 128 would be, well, here's our first loop, so that's 128. Here's our second loop, so that'd be 256. And here's our third loop, which will give us our 384. So yeah, tick in the box, no problem at all. I went down to a sample rate, and sorry, I can't prove some of this final bit because it messes up my mic. So I then went to 64 sample size and tested it. And sure enough, it came out at 192, which would be 3 lots of 64. Brilliant. And then I thought, right, I'm going to test, because this is at audio now, I'm going to test this at a 32 buffer size, which should give me 96. And it gave me a 192, which really sort of messed my brain up. So it's saying, hang on a second, it didn't go smaller than that 64 buffer size. So one or two things were going in my head, which was either it's lying, you know, somewhere in here, it's lying to me and it's not really setting this, which I don't believe. That's something I'm not believing. So I believe when I do set my 32 samples up here, it really is setting that to 32 samples. I do believe that. God, I hope I haven't messed my mic up again because I'm looking at this stuff. Or the second thing, and I think this is probably quite probable, as I said, pre 10.3, everything was done as a buffer size of 64. They could have easily looked at this and said, well, because we're looking at data and we're going to push it into a larger bucket, that's relatively easy to do. You know, even we're doing this here with our CV to audio. We're taking our CV and put it into a big bucket. It's not a problem. We don't lose anything. But if we go from audio to CV, we absolutely lose loads of stuff. And it could be that when they were looking back at 10.3, and maybe they did look at trying to make it a smaller a buffer size, maybe when they started picking up the code and the threads, they may have, they may have started getting a bit sticky and decided, it's just not worth it. We can make a smallest buffer size of 64 and off we go. That's what they've lived with for the last 20 years. Why rock the boat? Which I would understand from a programming point of view. So that's the only kind of answer I could come up with that on the audio side. It's very confusing. As I say, 64 gave me the right result. Anything else I set, sample rate, I got the correct latency. It was just that smaller one of the 32 and the 48. I had a 48 sample rate as well. It never affected this whatsoever. So that was it. There's my two simple findings. And I think the very final conclusion, what I took out of this, obviously I got my answer about my seed of doubt on CV, but I messed it up then. I've got a new one now. What's going on with this? But the other thing which I really loved looking at this was my counters and the answers I was getting in my counters, because they really were kind of getting these spot on figures. And I thought, wow. And I'm not saying, hey, look at me, I've written brilliant counters. No, I'm talking about how we can really marry things like our VSTs, in this case it happens to be the Great Voltage Modular, inside of Reason, and how they really do link together. We've got a perfect kind of sample match for the audio, which you really would expect, but also for the CV as well, which is quite impressive. So on that bark, I think I'm going to say thank you for watching, and bye for now.